Hey, thank you. So it's my great pleasure to introduce our next speaker, Kevin Cancienne, and say a few words about him. I often think of the New York City game community as having a very lovely family-like quality, and for me, Kevin is like having a sibling who's like exactly 1 year older than you, who's like doing all of the same things but just like slightly before you do, which is both comforting and also, always makes you feel like you're chasing someone who's a lot better at programming than you, which is definitely the case with Kevin. So Kevin and I both started working in games in the late 90s. We came from the web, and Kevin worked on a mod for Half-Life called Science and Industry, which was really one of the groundbreaking team play mod. And then, like 6 months later, I also sort of came out with an online multiplayer game. And then down the road, we both worked at local NYC studios, which were led by a founding member of the Game Center. Kevin was working on games like Drop 7, Parking Wars, and maybe my personal favorite, the MMO about looking both ways before you cross the street, Code of Everend. And we've both taught game design at NYU. Kevin did that before me. And then we were both part of No Quarter last year and had games. But I got my game done a little bit before Kevin, who was finishing it at the very last minute, but then it was so incredibly fantastic. And it really expressed the quality that I like about his designs, which is, I think of him as a designer with real heart in his work. And that's not something I say lightly. And it's a tricky concept. It's the kind of thing where you can tell that Kevin takes a very thoughtful approach to whatever he's doing, even though if he doesn't know what he's doing. He's not just sort of thinking of an interesting sort of sciencey problem and then tackling it. He's getting deeply perplexed and troubled about something because he doesn't know what it is, so much so that he has to like go and take a nap. And then when he wakes up and throws himself deeply into something, it has this sort of dreamlike quality where you sense that he like sort of intuited a solution. And so when he unveiled Dog Park last year, it was a little bit breathtaking, not just because it looks very beautiful, but because it's possibly the best game that I've ever seen about being a dog. There's so much more role-playing in that game than I've seen in a long time in a multiplayer digital game, because you are embodied as a dog. You're doing dog things, and you realize, well, what am I supposed to do in this game? Well, it's whatever a dog would want to do. So the only goals you have are dog goals, and there's something wonderful about that. And so I was extremely excited to hear that Dog Park had combined with another concept that Kevin had kind of been dreaming and wrestling with since the year before of a procedural city, and that became Home Free, which was just recently kickstarted, which prompts me to think, oh yeah, I have to work on my Kickstarter for my No Quarter project because once again I'm chasing Kevin Cancienne. So now I'm going to hand it over to him.
Thank you. All right. Yeah? Microphone? Good? All right, yeah. Thanks, Naomi. I guess as with all of these intros, you kind of stole, some of what I was going to say, but not that much. So I'm going to start in 2012, where I spent the year kind of waiting out a year-long non-compete agreement. I had asked a lawyer, what could I do to not get sued while I was waiting this out? And he said, look, when you get sued, it's going to be fine, you're going to win. And I was like, no, but what about not getting sued? And he said, well, if you want to not get sued, you shouldn't work. So that's what I did. I spent the whole year not doing any commercial work, and instead I decided to teach myself some new skills, including how to work by myself. I'd spent some time, like Naomi was saying, working at a great studio with amazing people, and now kind of through circumstance, I was working on my own, and I wanted to try to figure out how I could do that and whether that was viable. So halfway through that year, Simon Parkin and Chris Donlan asked me to contribute to their new blog. They wanted me to write a feature called Letters from a New York Indie. I felt kind of embarrassed about this. I hadn't been in indie for very long. I hadn't really got anything important or impressive done as one in my mind. And I didn't feel like I could speak for New York. But it seemed like the kind of thing you say yes to, so I said yes to it. I didn't keep it up for very long, but I tried to write about some of the design ideas I was working through. I often kind of used music as a metaphor for getting through this stuff and kind of came up with the sort of like, platitudes and pseudo-wisdom that you kind of do in these kind of things. I was talking about how do you prototype things and what's interesting about having an additive game design process. You start small and figure out what's working as you go along. The benefits of short-form games, and I said that I didn't really see myself working on an epic big game anytime soon. And then I kind of embedded these warnings to myself in there about maybe I was biting off more than I could chew as being a solo developer trying to do every single part of the game development process myself. And so, 2.5 years down the line, since then, I can say that I definitely ignored all of my own advice and most of those warnings. And so that's why today I'm going to talk about how to do everything wrong. Becoming a full-time dog animator. So a quick caveat, this is not really a game design talk. I feel awkward about that too. I'm going to be talking a lot about animation. Furthermore, I'm not an animator, so if you are an animator, I apologize in advance because I'm going to be talking about animation. I really don't know what I'm talking about. So like Naomi said, about 1.5 years ago, Charles Pratt asked me to take part in No Quarter 2014. I was still on this working by myself kick, and so I wanted to figure out a thing that I could do completely on my own. As Naomi mentioned, in the meantime, I had been working with really no direction and no intent on this procedural city engine. I had it kind of working. I didn't know why I started working on it. I didn't know what it was for, and so I kind of just set it aside. So when it was time to think about what I was going to do for No Quarter, I did the obvious thing, and I decided to make a game with dogs in it. So my plan was, and it came to me in a flash, I wasn't going to make a game for No Quarter. I was going to make 2 games. One for No Quarter, which was going to be about dogs playing with each other, and that became Dog Park. And the other was about a dog and a city, and that was going to be Home Free. The idea being that I would kind of use the work and the assets and the control scheme and the thoughts and the stuff that I proved out in Dog Park and pull that over as a multiplayer experience and pull that over into a single-player experience in Home Free. So, aside from the obvious why dogs, these are a couple pictures of my dog, Princess, playing a few years ago. I think that one of the great pleasures of living with another animal, right, another kind of animal, is this sort of vicarious thrill of experiencing another kind of body. You watch them move through space. If you have a cat, you watch them jump on all of your stuff. If you have a dog, you maybe get to watch them chase a tennis ball. And there's just, for me, something intrinsically appealing about that, about getting to kind of get outside of ourselves a little bit as we watch them do this stuff, right? As a game designer, I'm kind of fascinated by the dynamics of dogs at play. Dogs who are playing in a healthy way, and by healthy I mean sort of like without tipping over into aggression, without the benefit of spoken language, are seem able to negotiate and even adjudicate rules with each other, right? Healthy dog play seems to be self-balancing. You'll see, if you look closely enough, dogs that are engaged in a chase, if the dog in the lead is too fast for the dog it's being chased by, it'll sometimes slow down and let the other dog catch up for a while so they can keep the game of chase going longer. And I find that fascinating. The book Life of Pi, I read it I'm not sure it's even that good, but I read it, I think. I remember reading it. And for some reason, this passage kind of always stuck with me from that book. If you don't know the story, and there was a movie also, which I didn't see, the hero of the book Pi is stranded in a tiny lifeboat out at sea with a tiger named Richard Parker. And in this scene, a huge flurry of flying fish erupt from the sea, and they're both starving. And this is what happens, right? So Richard Parker was tougher than I in the face of those fish and far more efficient. He raised himself and went about blocking, swiping, and biting all the fish he could. Many were eaten alive and whole, struggling wings beating his mouth. It was a dazzling display of might and speed. Actually, it was not so much the speed that was impressive as the pure animal confidence, the total absorption in the moment. Such a mix of ease and concentration, such a being in the present, would be the envy of the highest yogis. Right? So the sheer spectacle of dogs in movement, I realized was also a thing that I was interested in. Right? And if I was going to make a game about dogs, I knew I wanted to portray that sense of pure movement. I never thought of myself as a big fan or proponent of immersion in games. I think I've often, at least in arguments with people over beers, argued against it. What's the big deal? Games are mathematical systems a lot of time at the core. Somehow for this project, for this concept that I came up with, I convinced myself that if I was going to do it right, I needed to be able to portray dogs in motion with some amount of fidelity, right? That the game feel of a game about being a dog was going to depend upon being able to move around as a dog. And what we're talking about is animation, obviously. But I'm not an animator. I'm a designer and a programmer. Before a couple of years ago, I'd never done any art at all, really. And I'd certainly done no animation. But I'm an idiot, and I decided that I had to do everything myself. So I did. So, luckily these days, obviously, game development, especially in 3D games, has become a lot easier for people working by themselves. We were working on small teams. There's game engines and tools that make everything a lot easier to get up and started. But these tools, in order to get you started more quickly, depend upon convention a lot of the time, right? So one convention in a lot of games is that you have, right, here's a typical army guy, right, from a game. A convention in games is not only that you have army guys, but that you have two army guys who stand on 2 feet, right? You have bipedal characters. One of the shortcuts we often use to handle collisions on bipedal characters, we use a vertical capsule, right? Itai was talking about vertical capsules, or just capsules for collisions. I think Anna was mentioning that this is a common abstraction that we use in games when we're portraying collisions for characters. Right, so the y-axis goes up vertically through the character, and this does a pretty good job when they're bumping up against stuff in the world. When you want them to turn around, you can kind of cheat by just rotating them on that vertical axis. You can smooth it out and make it look nicer by putting some lean in the animation. But for the most part, that's all you need to do. You just twist this capsule around, and it depends upon the fact that humans actually kind of can stop and start on a dime, right? Because of how our feet and our bodies work. If you try this exact same technique for a 4-legged animal, for a quadruped, it doesn't work as well, right? It looks awkward and jerky. Okami is probably still the best game about being a dog, right? Starring a dog, and you're a wolf or a god wolf. But it's a game about it being a dog, right? And it's awesome and it's great, but it kind of has the same problem, right? So you can see that for perfectly good reasons, like game feel and controllability, the motion here is just sort of jerky and sudden, and you can kind of like shoot off at right angles very easily without the sense of momentum and the fact that arguably a dog, unlike a person who's able to stop on a dime and twist and turn, maybe wants to move more like a car or the warthog in Halo, right? That's not what I was looking for. I was looking for something like this, right? Right? These animals that kind of cast these big arcs through space and then kind of descend in these little curly cues. This sinuous and sinewy movement. This is what I wanted to try to capture. I have no idea whether I could, but this is what I saw in my mind's eye. One of the other benefits of working in game development nowadays is that in addition to having game engines that are full of stuff ready to set up, ready to use, is there's a bunch of assets, especially if you're working in a small team or a solo. Just huge libraries of motion captured data for animations that you can just get. But of course, the same bipedal bias exists here, right? There's very few decent quadrupedal animations out there at your disposal. So, and I didn't have a mocap studio or a ping pong suit for my dog. So I decided I have to do it all by myself. So in this period, I had developed an art style that I felt okay about. It was kind of the sweet spot between what I could get done and what I thought was okay looking. So I reached the point where I had a dog, and I thought it looked pretty okay. So I needed to make it move. I had to return to first principles because I'd never done this before, and because there was a real lack of information I was finding out there, right? So I looked at texts about cartooning and animation. Even in there's not a lot of stuff. There's only a couple pages in each of these books about 4-legged creatures. Most cartoon animals walk around on 2 legs. I found more information when I started descending into the weird world of dog fanciers, these kind of arcane books about stuff written by weirdos. I'm not kidding. I mean, yeah, these people seem like kind of reprehensible people, a lot of them. But I try to learn about how dogs were put together, the dynamics of how their legs moved, the front and the rear, the way they shift their weight around. And yeah, the dog, a lot of this stuff is like from the 50s, and so like weirdly full of like racism and misogyny and just confounding stuff, right? Like this. But I after a while of kind of really delving into this stuff, I internalized, I think, some of it, and started getting to the business of trying to figure out how to make a dog move. So how do dogs move? Well, here's my very patient, understanding dog princess. And dog front paws are really, really weird. So dogs walk on their toes, actually, from a skeletal perspective. And the range of motion is huge. That when it's extended, it tends to do like this. When it's underweight, the paw kind of extends down at a right angle. When it's behind them, it goes like that. When they lift it up, it goes like this. And yeah, there she is. Right? She's just so... She doesn't care. I mean, she got... I just recorded this video. I mean, she is used to this by now. Right, so this is a snapshot from a tutorial I found of someone rigging a dog's front paw. It's this half-hour-long process that he describes, building this like machine. It makes me want to throw up. It's so complicated. I didn't do this. But I came up with a thing that was, I think, decent. Don't look too closely if you're a rigger, because there's a million problems with this. But the front paw the front legs work okay. The hind legs, even though they have 3 joints, and that's a little complicated for IK, I think work okay with inverse kinematics control. You can change the angles of the feet. You can change the rotation of the hips. And so, yeah, I'm such an idiot. I had, at this point, I could pose, right? I could pose, so I could pose a dog, right? So now what I need to do is make it move. When you're talking about how dogs move, when you're talking about quadrupedal locomotion, you start talking about all the different gaits that a quadruped can use when it moves. There's the walk, the trot, canter, gallop. There's 2 kinds of gallop. When you talk about humans, you generally don't talk about gaits as distinctly. Quadrupeds will use these different gaits depending on the speed at which they're moving. Different quadrupeds, based on their weight and their proportions, might prefer different gaits at different speeds. When you're talking about humans, you don't really talk about this very much. Most of our gaits are simply, most of them, right, are simply 1 foot in front of the other. They might differ in terms of the speed or the stride length, or how much of the time you're spending in the air between them, but it's always right, left, right? So these are footfall diagrams. These are a way, there's a few different forms of notation. This is a way that you can visualize how a 4-legged animal's feet contact the ground when they're using these different gaits, right? And so you notice that some are symmetrical, meaning that the same sequence repeats itself on the right and the left side. And some are asymmetrical, meaning it matters whether the gait is initiated with the right or left foot, because each foot is going to land at a distinct position in time in each cycle and won't simply repeat right to left, right? So here's a little bit more, a better way to visualize this, right? So the walk is a simple, straightforward left, right gait, like the human one, except the front pair of legs is offset from the back pair of legs by about half a phase in a single cycle, right? So the front legs go right, left, and the back legs go right, left, but a little bit afterwards. The trot is a very simple gait in which the diagonal pairs of limbs move basically at the same time, right? So the dog is moving those at the same time and those at the same time. So what we have here is the running or flying trot. You can see there's a blank spot in the middle there, and that's a moment of suspension when, in this relatively faster trot, all of the legs are off the ground at the same time. And the gallop, we're going to focus more on the rotary gallop in a minute. This is called a rotary gallop because the dog rotates through all of its limbs in a single cycle, right? So they'll go right, rear, right, front, left, rear, and then cycle through that, versus a transverse gallop in which the order is different, right? So you can see it in more detail here. This is a plate, right? And no discussion of animal locomotion is complete without talking about Muybridge. Does everyone know who Edward Muybridge was? Does everybody know he was a murderer? He was a murderer. It's amazing. I just learned this. So if you don't know who he was, in 1878, he's the person who proved that that there's a moment in a horse gallop where all four legs are off the ground at the same time. Along the way to proving this, he also kind of invented the basics for motion pictures, right? So this was a very important step in actually portraying film. But Leland Stanford was funding his research in order to try to win a bet. There's this founder of Stanford University. Muybridge he thought his wife was cheating on him, and he thought that maybe the baby she just had come from this other guy, and so he just shot the guy. He was on trial for murder. Stanford hired a lawyer, and he got off on a justifiable homicide. It delayed the progress on this for about 5 years. But you can see here, that doesn't affect us. You still have this nice picture, right? You can see here what I'm talking about with the gallop very clearly, right? So you have the left hind leg in contact with the ground, then the right hind leg, then the right front, and then the left front. So that's the rotary gallop. So this is actually, strangely enough, this was a really important image for me in getting this into the game. I found this in a strange research paper from Japan in the 1970s about, it's full of terrible vivisection and stuff. It's not a nice read. They were studying how the muscles were recruited in the vertical jump in quadrupeds. But they filmed dogs, and the frame information here I found really, really useful in getting my gallop animation done. So I decided to animate my gallop in motion, meaning that I translated the dog's body through space first, equal to the distance that I wanted it to travel in a single cycle. When you do this, it becomes easier to prevent skating feet as opposed to just animating a walk cycle in place. So, then I just did like 3D animation stuff, right? So you go through keyframe by keyframe, posing the different joints and limbs in the appropriate place, using your reference. This happens, right? So 3D animation stuff happened. But ultimately it led to this, right? And this is just me very, very by hand, very slowly going through this. The real animation is not this slow or choppy, I promise. But this looked pretty good to me, right? So I have a dog that can run in a straight line. So now I had to make it turn. So when turning at high speeds, dogs need to counterbalance like motorcycles, right? In order to overcome centrifugal force and maintain friction so they don't just tumble over, right? You can see that here. Right, so they lean into the turn and their paw position reacts in order to maintain balance. I'll wait. I'll just. We'll wait till this is done, and then I'll go to the next slide. Is it almost? Wait, almost done? They just keep going. Okay, so what I decided to do was to take my straight gallop and animate it along a series of different curves at different radii, right, to simulate different turning radii. So I had to go into each keyframe and adjust the body lean and move the feet to where they wanted to be. The feet tend to want to stay under the new center of gravity as the body is leaning. And so for each of those keyframes on my 30-ish frame animation, I had to kind of individually position these feet. This was annoying because remember that the gallop is an asymmetrical gait. So when I had done, say, the two left turns, I couldn't just mirror all the stuff over to the right side. I had to, for the right turns at both radii for each keyframe, individually position the feet, and it sucked. I never want to do it again. But at that point, I have 5 animations at this point, and what I can do is I can blend between the 5. I've straight, and then a medium left, medium right, left, and tight right. That's right. And yeah, now you have a dog that can run around. And to my eye, this looks pretty okay, right? This is what I had been visualizing, a sort of a naturalistic-ish dog in motion, right? So I did it, right? So now I could start working on my game. And so of course this is the wrong way to do things. If a student or someone starting out in games came to me and told me they were going to polish a bunch of their graphics before digging in on all the gameplay, I tell them not to do it, right? Come on, listen. I'm a grown-up. Here's how grown-ups do games. They prototype things, and then if it turns out they need to do some animation, they'll do the animation later. But that's not what I did, right? So out of some mix of pragmatism and arrogance, I was committed to working on this by myself. I consciously became my own bottleneck. Deciding that I wouldn't be able to make the game I intended to unless I could first prove that I could make it look and feel the way I thought it had to. I had no business believing that I could, but I decided that was how I was going to do this. I have, I think, still this completely unfounded faith that funneling my ambition through my ability to execute would yield worthwhile results. Because Naomi mentioned 2 weeks ago I kickstarted Home Free. And at this point I still have at least another year to go on the project. I've done another few hundred animations aside from the one that I just described. The trailer I'm about to show you, which was for the Kickstarter, gives you a sense of how those things kind of start to all come together. Let's see if this plays properly with sound. No. Doot, 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 doot. Dylan, sound? Think we can do it? Sorry, man. I'm sorry. You're so far away. No. It's a buzz, right? Oh, wait, there we go. Here we go. It's just music. It's nice music. All right, so that's it. Thank you. There's Naomi. Where's Naomi? Naomi's my boss, right? That's how this...
Naomi?
All right, questions? Naomi, do you have a question? It's okay, I could do it. Right? Do you want to do it?
I'll totally do it. Sorry, I'm like live tweeting too much. Okay. Does anyone have a question for Kevin? Evan.
So the big thing, my big question with this game is, we're trying to do like from an animal first perspective. How do you, have you already had to like, not, are there instances where you try to anthropomorphize the animal and make it seem more human and then pull that stuff out? Because it seems like you want to lay some of that stuff over in a game like this.
Yeah, it's definitely I think it's one of the central challenges of a thing like this. I'm trying to keep anthropomorphization to a minimum, right? I really do, and I think that this is my post hoc justification for my focus on animation is, I think that, without this being a really composed theory at the time, my approach has been that in order to portray what it feels like to be an animal, you got to be doing animal stuff, right? So my goal in the game is to give you reasons, give you goals that are fairly intrinsic to what an animal wants to do. Of course, it's going to be pretty gamey. There's going to be, I'm going to have actual text on the screen, even though dogs don't read. I'm not, but yeah, yeah. Bennett Foddy knows about, right? Thomas Nagel, right? That's a relevant thing here. Is that relevant, Bennett? Right? Right, about how it feels to be a bat, right? That like we can't really know that. I'm trying to square that circle by letting you embody this other creature and kind of walk a mile in its paws. And I hope that that'll get it done. That's the idea.
We have time for one or two more back there.
So have you considered any kind of interface to simulate or model like a dog's smell or something?
Yeah, there's definitely going to be some of that in there. I kind of feel like de-emphasizing that for some reason. Dog's Life, which was a PS2 title about being a dog, put a lot of emphasis on that, on sort of, you'd have this kind of blue cloud that you would follow, and then there'd be a quest goal at the end of it. Lots of games have been doing that, like The Witcher has stuff like that, and for whatever reason, I don't feel like I'm very interested in that. So yeah, I mean, this does speak to, I'm making these decisions, right? And I'm trying to be at peace with the idea that I'm not going to in any way accurately portray what it feels like to be a dog. This is my impression of that, and so I'm making decisions about what to leave aside or what to just gloss over, and what to portray. There's going to be some of it, but it's not going to be like you switch into smell-o-vision, and then do it that way. It's just not what I'm interested in.
Okay, last question.
I was wondering, it's interesting because you're talking about the experience of dogs, but it's you put a lot of time into animation, and it's actually a third-person game. Right?
Yes.
So it almost seems like it's actually this relationship of being a human, imagining what it's like to be a dog, which you kind of talked about.
I think that's exactly right. Yeah.
Right. So can you talk about that decision, like when you decided to make that particular design choice?
I mean, the entire thing came to me really, really rapidly and kind of wholly formed, and it's been part of what's made this experience strange about the fact that I kind of became my own bottleneck on getting all this stuff done. It's meant that a lot of the game design has had to happen in slow motion, right? As I'm percolating on the ideas while I'm watching myself animate these freaking things. I like playing first-person games. I like shooting people in the head in video games, and that's the best way to do it, in the first person. I feel like for this, I think there is a weird paradox where seeing a character in the third person actually tends to be a lot more expressive and tends to immerse you a lot more in what that character's going through. And so that, to me, that just felt like the natural way to get it done. I mean, there's also a really goofy, pragmatic concern, which is that I decided to do this as two games, right? And the first game was a third-person, four-player game, and so it was just very natural for me to take some assets from that one and plop it into the other one. And so some of that was by default, but I do feel like, I did think about it. I did wonder, would it make sense to, like, see your paws in front of you? There's games that do that. It doesn't feel right for this, because I really want you to be able to feel like you're part of, but also witness the travails here. And I think looking at them full body is strangely an important element of that. Yeah. So I thought about it, didn't do it.
Okay, we have to wrap it up there. So a big round of applause for Cancienne.